Good afternoon. Well, welcome to our conversation about Wait Until Dark. Thank you, Skip, for that wonderful introduction. Nikolai, thank you as well. And we are honored to be here. I had no idea this was our 18th panel. I promise we will get it right one of these days. But we are honored to be here, Skip. This has been a consistent opportunity for us that we don't get anywhere else to talk about our work in depth, to talk about what goes into the creation of a play, and to really talk about the artistic process. And so thank you, Skip, thank you to the Clinton School, and thank all of you for joining us today for this conversation. And I'll talk a little bit about the play. Let me introduce our guests. It's a different mix than we usually have if you are regulars in our conversations. Our first two panelists are actors in the company. Michael Stewart Allen plays the role of Harry Rote Jr. and Sr. in the play. Amy Hutchins plays the role of Susy, and in real life, they're married. And in this play, they get to beat the crap out of each other. So I don't know what that says. But both Michael and Amy are veterans of Arkansas Rep Productions. Michael was in the first play I ever directed at Arkansas Rep. That was The Grapes of Wrath back in 2001. And you've also been in Romeo and Juliet, of Mice and Men, right? And so we're glad to have you back. Michael just came off of the national tour of Warhorse, where he was on the road for 2 years. Amy was in our production of It's a Wonderful Life, the radio play, which I directed in Christmas of 2008. That's right. So we're glad to have both Michael and Amy back. In fact, this cast of Wait Until Dark is unique in that every one of them is a Rep veteran. Every one of them has been in a play or in our Young Artists projects at the Rep. Some of them have been in multiple productions. Also, both of our creative team that are joining us today are veterans at the Rep and veterans on projects that I've had the pleasure of working with. Yael Lebetsky this is your third project at the Rep. She lit Les Mis last year. If you saw Les Mis, that was her lighting. And she also lit Clybourne Park, a production that Cliff Baker directed last January. Yael flew in from Mexico City to join us for this production, where she was lighting the Mexico City premiere of The Addams Family. Very similar projects, but she was glad that here we speak English. Of course, Yael's from New York, so I guess coming to Arkansas, that's a toss-up, but we're very glad that Yael is back for Wait Until Dark. D.C. Wright is our fight choreographer. D.C. is on the faculty of Western Illinois University. This is D.C.'s 11th production. If you have seen any kind of physical engagement on our stage since Romeo and Juliet, you've seen D.C.'s work. He's done all the Shakespeare's that I've directed. He's done every fight that we've staged on our stage. We've brought D.C. in, and his storytelling is exceptional when it comes to how stories are told through the physicality of the characters, particularly when that physicality is heightened into violence. No actors are harmed in the creation of these plays. That's not true, but Wait Until Dark, Frederick Knott wrote Wait Until Dark. It opened on Broadway in 1966. It was Knox's follow-up to his big success, which was Dial M for Murder. Wait Until Dark opened on Broadway with Lee Remick in the title role of Susy. She was joined in that production by the young Robert Duvall. The cast is 7. It's always been 7. In that era, in the mid-60s, these sort of suspense thrillers were a popular genre, and so the play, Wait Until Dark, which ran for a year on Broadway, and Lee Remick was nominated for a Tony for her role, Lee Remick. That's right, isn't it? It's Lee Remick. I get them mixed up, but it was Lee Remick. But they made it almost immediately into a movie. How many of you have seen the movie Wait Until Dark? See, lots of folks. So you know the basic storyline. But that was Audrey Hepburn. And her co-star in that movie was Alan Arkin, a very young Alan Arkin. She was joined in that production by Richard Crenna, who many of you know from his television work and, of course, through his Rambo films. And also joined in that film by, who was the other, it was Richard Crenna, it was Jack Weston, it was Ephraim Zimbalist Jr., playing the role of Sam, and a young actress whose name I'm forgetting played the little girl Gloria, and she was the only one who made the transition from the Broadway play to the film. She was in both the Broadway play and in the movie. So all-star cast. And then the play was revived in 1998 with Marissa Tomei playing Susy and Quentin Tarantino playing Rote. That play ran for about 80 performances and was roundly panned by all critics. It was supposedly not a particularly good production. Wait Until Dark came to my attention. I'd always known it as a film, and Bravo ranks the last 10 minutes of the film as one of the 100 scariest moments in movie history. And so I was familiar with the film, but I had never seen the play. And then a couple of years ago, a playwright named Richard Hatcher wrote an adaptation of Wait Until Dark that was produced by the Geffen Playhouse, which is one of our leading regional theaters in Los Angeles. And so and Richard Hatcher's kind of a big deal playwright in America, and so that adaptation started making the rounds of regional theaters, and that's when it came to my attention. And I thought, well, let me read that. Now, if you know the movie, you know it's set in the mid-60s in Greenwich Village. And Hatcher's adaptation moves the play to 1946 and changes the thing that the bad guys are looking for from heroin to diamonds. And then he, of course, because he's an American modern playwright, he laced the revival with profanity. And so I read that version, and I went back to the Knox version, and I really thought that, the rep had never done Wait Until Dark, and even though the Hatcher version is the popular version right now, I decided to do the original version, the Knox version, the one that's set in '66 in Greenwich Village, and that they're all chasing after a doll full of heroin. And that's not really a big plot giveaway because they lay that out right in the beginning. But I just thought the feel of mid-'60s, which was kind of on the cusp, I don't want to get into this too much, but the late '60s is not the same as the early '60s. And what happened from '68 all the way up through Kent State and '72, going back to the Sharon Tate murders and how the dark side of the '60s that started to emerge and be part of our consciousness in '69, '70, in that era there. '66 to me seemed like a real flip, a real turning point in our cultural consciousness. And so the play really walks that line between a character like Harry Rote, who is a nihilist. He is just a flat-out sociopath. And the other bad guys who really seem more kind of like 1950s era bad guys. And that change, that shift in American culture that happened in the '60s, and we wanted to keep that culture, and that's even reflected in the sound design for the show and the music we chose for the show. But I just was so attracted to the play, and it had been a long time since the rep had done a thriller. In fact, I think you have to go back to The Woman in Black. So, Jim, did you see The Woman in Black? There's got to be some people who saw The Woman in Black. See, some of you did see The Woman in Black. And that must have been 20 years ago. So I've been here 16, and it was way before I was here. So it had been a long time since the rep had done a thriller. And so I felt like it was time for us to do a thriller again. Now, let's talk about the play itself and how you bring that play to light. That's a good way to start with Yael. with a play like Wait Until Dark, it gets dark. How do you deal with that as a lighting designer? I don't think we've ever had a lighting designer on our panel. So talk about what a lighting designer does. What do you do? What's your process? How do you fit into the creative process? And how did this play present any particular challenges for you?
Okay. Well, a lighting designer in basic terms is really how you see pretty much everything that you're going to see. The basic job of a lighting designer is to make sure that you have visibility for what's important at the time. But in this particular piece, there's a lot of different things that you have to deal with. One is you're in a basement apartment, which normally in the world would have 4 walls and a ceiling. We have not all of that, but we have some of that. So my question always was, how am I going to make this feel like a real world that these people are living in and not feel like we're sitting in a theater, but at the same time figure out a way to heighten it? So when I spoke to Bob about it, that was my first issue. Like, how do we make this feel real and not make it feel like, not musical theater, but not make it feel something that's not tangible in that way, but at the same time be able to heighten all those moments. So that was my first issue, and I really struggled with that, actually, to be honest, because it's terrifying and it's really hard to do it and to do it well, and that was really, really important to me. The other thing about a lighting designer in this particular piece is also, unlike the film, which I'm sure a lot of you have seen and I've seen it, and I didn't actually watch it before we came to do the show. I've seen it many, many years ago. But it has a certain kind of quality to it that you can see shadows in a certain way and the camera points in a way that we can't do that in the theater. We don't have a camera. We have lighting, we have choreography, we have staging, we have sound. And all of those things have to work together. So when I was trying to tell the story, I was thinking, okay, how do I do that the way a camera would do it? There are certain things that when you see the show, if I tell you now, maybe you'll notice them, but I think you wouldn't if I didn't tell you. Like, for example, there is a washing machine. So I have a slash of light on the washing machine. There's a reason why I have it there. You might not know that, but as the play progresses, people walk in and out of that light at particular times, and that it's there for storytelling. And that's a way a camera will do something, but we do it differently in the theater with lighting. The other huge challenge is the play is called Wait Until Dark, and I'm sure a lot of people know about certain things that happen in the piece. But sometimes there'll be one light on, and when you're in a room with one light, it's bouncing from a wall back to somebody's face. But we can't do that in the theater, so we have to pick very specific angles and very specific color and figure out how to show you what you need to see, but not show you too much, and keep the tension alive. And I guess there's a lot more. But in this particular case, it's very different. I mean, it's a much, much different piece than doing something like a musical, for example, with singing and dancing. And it's different than other realistic interiors that I've done, because a lot of it does take place in the dark with very few practicals, what we call practicals, which are light bulbs, things like that we're all used to seeing in the real world, and how to recreate that on a stage to tell a story.
Before Yael even came to Little Rock, we sat in the theater, the production team sat in the theater, and we turned off all the lights. And we wanted to see what we could see in the dark, and how long it took our eye to adjust to the dark. Because the play is called Wait Until Dark, and there are times when that absence of light is essential to the storytelling. And so what you find in a theater, in our theater, when you turn off the lights, is it's not dark at all. Because there are 6 or 10 exit signs, all glowing at you. There are the lights that illuminate the aisles coming from the bottom of the seats. There are the alcoves that have sconces in them that are lit up. And then there are all of the computer screens that glow, that control all the technology of the performance. So all the computer screens, the computer array in front of the sound designer, the computer array in front of the lights, the computer array in front of the stage manager, the glow of those screens illuminates the room. So we went about creating covers transparent covers for all the computer screens that allowed the operators to see the screens but diminished the glow. Our master electrician took different colors of cellophane and inserted them into the fixtures that illuminate the exit signs so that they still illuminated, but they didn't reflect. So you can still see where they are, but they don't cast a glow. We turned off all of the lights under the seats and put in glow tape so that like a runway if the lights go out, but there's no glow from that. And then we replaced all of the bulbs in the sconces with blue light, which doesn't glow. And so we created that environment right off the bat to achieve, and you'll see that when you see the play, right at the beginning of the play, we'll go into blackout as the play starts, and it'll be the darkest blackout you've ever seen in a play in our stage. And it will be a terrible time for your cell phone to go off. It will be very embarrassing, and we will get very upset. And then think about this, when we talk about lighting. If you've seen the film, you know that a refrigerator, she mentioned a washing machine, a refrigerator also figures very prominently in the play. And the light that's cast by the interior of the refrigerator. So we had to spend quite a bit of time manipulating the refrigerator light. What's the quality of the light? How bright is it? What's the intensity of the light? Is it controlled by a dimmer? Where, what, is it too bright? Is it blinding you? Do we need to put a screen in front of it? Do we need to put foods in the refrigerator that, when illuminated, cast a certain quality of light through the food? So that factored in to all of the lighting design in a way that you normally wouldn't have to factor in. I'll mention matches in a minute, but let's go and talk to Amy and Michael. Amy, you are charged with bringing to life a character that we're familiar with in many ways, and the one thing we know about the character because of the film is we know she's blind. How do you create a blind character on stage? What are the challenges?
Well, it's definitely a challenge because I have sight, and I have to portray a character who does not have sight, and it's my first time ever portraying a character who's visually impaired. So that in itself is a major challenge. I worked with World Services for the Blind here in Little Rock on our first day of rehearsal. I met with them for 2.5 hours. We did domestic training where I learned techniques for cleaning the table and sweeping and cooking if I didn't have sight. We did mobility training where I wore the sleep shades and learned how to walk with a white cane. And I noticed, how I carried myself, how I listened, where voices seemed to come from when I had those shades on. And I also observed a lot of their clients. I observed them in different classes. I observed them in the cafeteria, and it was really interesting. The person who runs it, Tony Woodell. He would point out people in the cafeteria, and he'd say, well, this person's been here for 6 months, and so watch how this person gets through the cafeteria, knows it so well, you can't even tell they're blind, because they know the area so well. And then you say, now look at this person. She's only been here for a week. Notice how cautious she is in this environment, and how tentative she is. And it was just so fascinating and so helpful. And then, of course, I had to bring that into the rehearsal process, and bring that into the rehearsal room, which at first was incredibly difficult, trying to remember lines, trying to act, and trying to pretend to be blind at the same time. I could act and be blind and forget my lines, or I could, it's just like I could do 2 out of the 3. At first it was quite difficult. But eventually I got used to kind of soft focusing my eyes. Bob helped me immensely by saying, nah, you don't look blind there at all. Your eyes are doing all kinds of stuff. He'd point things out to me, and so really I had to kind of train my eyes not to react as much, like the entire area, from like eyebrows, this whole area. So that was really challenging. But eventually, the more you do it, the better you get at it. And it's just tricky. It's just tricky. But I think I'm doing it, and it's working out. And the hardest thing is if somebody moves across the stage, your eyes want to follow them. You just want to see where they're going. I can't do that. So I really have to just pick a spot. The last place an actor was speaking to me, I'll pick that spot. And if that actor is quietly moving across the stage, unless they're walking loudly, I can't really track them. I have to hold that spot. Or if they're standing and speaking to me and then they sit, I don't know that they sat. I can't track that. I just have to keep that point. So it's been a challenge. It's been fun, but challenging.
Now let's ask Michael about his character. Harry wrote, he's a cold-hearted guy, and he's called upon to to impersonate a variety of different people as part of the ruse of this con that they're laying out in the plot. I don't know where to start in terms of saying, is it hard for you to play a psychopath? Because what's the answer to that question? No, it just comes naturally. But are there things about this character, like it's very physical. Is there a preparation process that you go through? I'd like to hear your comment about that. And then I also, not apropos to this play, but just because you spent 2 years on the road doing Warhorse, how do you play a role for 2 years and not want to just go crazy? 2 years, how does an actor sustain work that long? But let's talk first about how do you create a character that is so deadly and so cold? And then how do you do all those things to your wife? That's secondary.
Well, that's a lot. As far as creating a character like Harry wrote, he's pretty fascinating in a way, because a lot of times you look at a play and as an actor and you can say, like the role I played in Warhorse, I played a very bad German in Warhorse, but I could look at that role and say, like, okay, well, I have a historical context for this guy. I read a book called Guns, Germs, and Steel, which is like the All Quiet on the Western Front, but told from the German side, and it's just like the ideology was wrong. And so once you find that about a character, you're like, oh, his ideology is off, so that's why he makes bad choices and does bad things, because he thinks he's right, And then to go to a character like Harry wrote, who knows that he's doing bad and enjoys it in a weird way, you have to sort of figure out why that happens and sort of to tap into that sort of nihilistic sociopath kind of mode, and sort of get into that. Because nobody really thinks they're bad, and I don't think Harry Road even thinks he's bad. I think it's just a different level of being better than everybody else. And I think that's the first thing that I sort of had to try and figure out as far as this guy, is that he really is profoundly arrogant. There's some great lines in the very final scene where he gets really mad at Susy because she thinks that she can outsmart him, and so that was like a key into him. Like he really likes himself a lot and thinks that he's better than everybody else. And then to sort of tap into the other side of him, which is what I think is the scariest about somebody, is when you're having a conversation with somebody and you're talking to someone and you think that they're just a normal person, and they're you're talking to them and all of a sudden they say something and you have that reaction of like, whoa, that is not right at all. Like what? And then you talk to them over the while and you feel like they have really skewed views on things, and that is sort of who this guy is that the first time you meet him, he's actually pretty charming and pretty fun, and then all of a sudden, very dangerous. And to me, that's where the character becomes interesting and exciting, is that he switches on a dime between being playful and being deadly. And sometimes it's the same, and he really enjoys that sort of like changing of modes within the character. And I think that comes across. I think it makes a person creepy. It makes him, very unstable. That I think is an important part of him as well. He's pretty unstable as far as things go, and I've chosen to manifest that in a way that he's very calm, but underneath there's all this stuff brimming inside that could explode out at any time, and that's fun. To your other point about the playing a character for 2 years. It was 750 performances, and it's an interesting thing. I learned a lot about being an actor, and myself and my process as an actor doing a show for that long, because you do go through waves. Like, I'm not gonna lie and say there weren't some performances were out there like in, I don't know, somewhere in Ohio, where I was like, okay, so tonight after the show, I'm probably gonna go have a nice dinner, and then you're saying your lines at the same time, and you realize that this is probably not a good thing to do. And then something clicks, and you realize that you've been the worst actor forever for doing that, because suddenly, like a word, you'll say a word differently, and that will change suddenly the whole scene, and people respond to you differently, and the play and the parts just become like one of those little Russian dolls that keep unlocking themselves, and you find smaller and smaller and smaller versions of it that become more and more interesting, and that is what you play with. And that to sustain a long run, I think you have to find it interesting. And to me, my big realization of doing a show for that long was that if you're bored on stage, it's your fault as an actor. And so there's always something to play with. There's always some challenge to give yourself. And that's what I've sort of enjoyed about, this is the first show that I've done since that, and taking that idea into this, is that Harry Road is a guy that doesn't have to be exactly the same every night, and he actually shouldn't be the same every night, because the thing that makes him crazy is his unpredictability. So finding the point where you find, and working with Amy is great because we already trust each other and know each other so well, and so I can sort of be, the final 10 minutes of the play has been different every time I've done it so far. Now we know with DC and our work with all of that stuff, is there are moments that you have to hit, and what's safe, and what has to happen, and places you have to be, and matches have to strike at a certain time and go out at a certain time, and all of the technical, that has to be there. But then you sort of get to riff. You get to it becomes like jazz in a way, and that you have your theme, where you're going, and then you can sort of bounce around that, and that's where it becomes really fun as an actor. And that that is a direct result of doing a show for that long, and figuring out that you have to make that interesting, and it's more interesting for an audience too, I think. So come see it more than once. Come see it 2 or 3 times.
DC, let me bring you into this conversation, and you're called upon to create the physical violence of the play, which is significant, and then you're also called upon to do that at times in the complete absence of light. So what's the point of that? How do we care? What makes us care about that? And then what are the particular challenges of creating the kind of violence that's called upon in this production, as opposed to a Shakespearean sword fight or something?
Sure. The job of a fight director is I'm instilling these heightened moments of the play, right? Fights or violence usually comes at the climaxes or the high points of the play. Something has gone wrong. Violence usually happens when people are no longer able to speak. They have become to the point where words no longer matter, and now I have to lash out physically. So my job as a fight director is to show you the parts as the audience. I want you to see all the violent, mean, terrible things, the hurtful things that are going on, while hiding from you all of the things that make it safe and make the actors not hurt at all. So it's a little bit of an illusion that I'm working on creating. Sometimes there's a lot of misdirection involved in it. If I get you to look over here while the thing that is happening over here is what is really going on, but you don't see it because you're looking at what's over here. In this play, it's kind of interesting because a lot of the high moments, that has been made significantly easier for me as a fight director because the lights are gone, right, or really, really low, and so it's much easier to hide things in the dark. And there's some sections where we've created the soundscape. We're working a lot with how it sounds because your sight is being taken away. You're kind of thrust into the blind woman's worldview for a while, and you have to experience the play as she experiences life, and you're kind of put into that space, which is a lot of fun. And there's a lot of times where I've got the actors on stage and I'm like, you need to make more noises, make these noises, bump into this thing and just smack it with your hand. If the lights were on, that would look stupid. But because you can't see it, we can make the sounds like that. And we're knocking over things. Normally we'd have to knock over things in a way that looked like people crashed into and knocked over that. With the lights off, we're taking very little. It doesn't matter what it looks like, it only matters what it sounds like. And so we've got a lot of destruction that happens in a very easy way for me and for the actors because they don't have to tell stories while they do it. They just have to make the sounds of it and keep that going for you. So in a way, some of the things were then very easy. Some of the Different things, perhaps a more challenging of this is, particularly if we compare it to a sword fight, say from Romeo and Juliet, and I'll talk about Romeo and Juliet because he was my Tybalt when I did Romeo and Juliet all those years ago. Sword fights happen at the end of 3 feet of steel. Each actor has 3 feet of steel in their hand, which allows them to be at least 6 feet away from each other when they're having this fight. And so swords have this kind of aura of romance and the concept of this duel and how it's a very honorable thing, and it's involved in there's a whole societal aspect of that, and it kind of lets you step back from it a little bit. Particularly, also, we don't sword fight in our life. So you, as an audience member, when you watch sword fights, you don't have anything that you connect it to in your life. It is something from the past that you can disassociate yourself with in some ways. And so when we're doing a sword fight, we're actually working really hard to try and bring you into this world that you don't know anything about because it's swords. With this play, we're dealing with a much more intimate form of violence. There's some weapons involved, but the weapons that are involved are very small. And short, meaning so that the people who are enacting violence on each other get really, really close. It's a very intimate kind of violence. They're right next to each other, and it's happening very close to another. They're not 6 feet away. So a lot of people think that it's easier because they don't have swords. I think it's actually much more tricky because they're so close, and you have to work really, you have to trust the person that you're working with a lot because there's a lot of things that you have to do very closely to one another. So in that instance, this was a very nice circumstance to walk into because they've been married for 7 years. And they know each other already. They have that bond of trust. If you come in and you're talking to 2 actors who've just met each other when they got cast and they show up to rehearsal and now we're going to have to do this sort of violence, you have to take things a lot slower because you have to make sure that both actors can begin to trust each other as you work through the violence process because there's a lot of things that they have to rely on. But these guys were like, okay, no problem. we can get into each other's personal space and invade it like this because they're already used to being close, right? So that was a benefit to me coming into this thing is I didn't have to work with them to build that trust. I was able to just take what they already had established and then go on with the storytelling parts. And the other thing I guess I'll say is I almost don't think there's necessarily fights in the show. There's only maybe 2 or 3 moments where I would say that there is actually a fight that happens, like if you think fight, but there is a tremendous amount of physical violent moments that happen. It's not 2 people who square off and duke it out and it lasts a big long time. It's just like moment to moment to moment, and it's building tension and building tension. And there's a significant amount of, there's a lot of work, a lot of physical work that these guys have to do in this play, and a tremendous amount of it is of the violent kind. But it's not 2 characters who decide to fight. And even in the big climactic scene at the end, there's only small moments that I would actually call them actual fights, but there are always things happening, and it's scary.
There is something particularly challenging about creating a suspenseful thriller on a stage, because you know to have that element of tension, to have that element of suspense, requires very precise manipulation of your emotions. And also, you know, y'all mentioned about you know, how the lighting helps sculpt the space. But it also helps us, you know, when we in a film, an editor instructs you, you know, the editor decides what you're looking at and what angle you're seeing it, and, you know, something scares you in a film, it's usually because it's a quick edit to the cat jumping out of the hallway or something coming through a window, right? That's a film edit technique that scares you, that startles you, that enhances. But in a play, first of all, they only get 1 shot every night to get that just right. A film, they can do 500 takes. These guys have to get it right, get that sort of tension right every night. And then through Yael's lighting, we manipulate where your eye goes, what you're looking at. You're looking at this, then the shocking thing happens over here, and that creates shock. And so how we structure those shocking moments and how we build that suspense, because you can't build suspense like this, right? And you can't keep suspense like this. A story that's suspenseful is this, right? It's peaks and valleys. You know, you watch a horror movie, you know, there's moments of tension, then a little bit of levity. And then they build you up tense again. You can't sustain this like this all the way through, and you can't just do it on a linear sort of diagonal. It has to be peaks and valleys. And so how we create that over the course of the 2-hour play is something that everybody has been collaborating on. And how every member of the team has to contribute that, whether it's the sound designer, because when it's dark, the storytelling happens orally. And there's those moments where we have to know what's going on, and we follow what's going on, not because we can see it, but because we can hear it. And then the moments when we choose to light a certain path or a certain swatch of the stage that gives you a piece of a story, and then a few minutes later you get another piece of the story, and your imagination puts those two pieces together. You know, that's what makes the play interesting to me as a director, because it's really hard. And we found out last night that we're pretty successful at how we're getting people to react to things. I mentioned, you know, and this is an example of what hard means. I mentioned earlier about matches. Well, if you've seen the film, and if you've seen the Democrat Gazette today with the publicity shot, a lot of matches in this play. A lot of things happen with matches in the latter part of the play, and you set up things for an hour and a half to get a payoff in the last, 20 minutes. Well, a match is an unpredictable thing, right? And unpredictable can't be part of our vocabulary. We have to have 100% predictability, because the story will get messed up and somebody will get hurt. So we spent quite a bit of time. Our production staff was very good about taking our rehearsal room, which is on the second floor of the building, and making it dark, making special shades for the room, and allowing it to get pitch black in the rehearsal room. And then we started with matches from Kroger, and we started playing around with just a box of matches, wooden matches that come in a little box. We stayed away from the strike anywhere matches because our props master, Linda Kwalik, had done a production of Wait Until Dark at the Alley Theater in Houston, where they used the strike anywhere matches, which would have been easier. The actress kept them in her pocket, and then during the roughhousing that occurs in the second act, they just lit up. And she had to run off stage with a smoking costume. And we didn't want to go there. So we had to keep the strikers. So we assembled all the matches, all the wooden matches we could, all the wooden matches we could find, and we looked at how they worked, what were the ones that were the most reliable, what kind of quality of light did they put off, and that was determined by how much of the little match head. The match heads are not all created equal. And so after quite a bit of experimentation, running those scenes with them chasing each other around the stage with these different matches, and then bundling different kinds of matches together, creating like little match packs out of different kinds of matches to get different quality of light, we actually landed on a particular brand of matches that you use to light a fireplace, the big long ones, and cutting those down and binding two of them together ultimately gave us the best, most reliable, extended effect. And also, you can binding two matches together like this is not the same as binding two matches together like that, right? If you bind them together where they are exactly side by side, you get a big burst, and then you get a diminishing effect. If you light them, and if you bind them together in a staggered fashion, you get staggered burst, so you get more sustained light over a longer period of time. So that's how I earned my living for about a day and a half. That's what makes, and so the technicality, the technical specifics of this play, combined with this team of actors who are veterans at the Rep have made telling this story fascinating on our end, and hopefully fascinating when you come and see it. Plays are driven by different devices. Some plays are the inner monologue, the intention, the subtext is the story. Contemporary American plays, it's all about relationship, and actors spend a long time talking about their history as a child or why this color means something to them, and the play unfolds as we learn their sort of psychological landscape, and that's fascinating. Wait Until Dark is not that kind of play. We don't learn anything about these people, and what we do here is probably a lie. We don't learn anything about these. This play takes place in 24 hours. It starts on a Friday night and it ends on a Saturday night. It's a 24-hour period of time taking place in this claustrophobic little Greenwich Village apartment of this young photographer and his newly married bride, who is also recently blind, and it's all plot-driven. It's all about what happens in that 24-hour window. And you have to determine what kind of story you're going to tell when you're setting out to direct a play, but this play is all about plot, all about what happens to these people in that 24 hours, which is also unique when it comes to how we tell stories on our stage. Let's open it up for questions. What would you guys like to know about? We have mics for those who want to ask something. Oh, somebody there. Jim has a question.
How strong does my stomach have to be to see this play?
Not at all. No problem. This is not a slasher film. This is not a, gory thing. This is Hitchcock. This is suspense and trying to stay one step ahead, trying to figure out what's going on, who's lying, who's telling the truth, what's going on in the story. There's nothing remotely gory about it. There's nothing gross about it. It is purely a suspense thriller, kind of old school suspense thriller. So it's much more psychological. I mean, there is stuff that happens at the end, but again, the cool thing about it is, when the tables turn, you're seeing the story from her point of view, which is in the dark. Like the big, huge, violent moment happens off stage. You hear it, but you don't see it. So, eat a big, full meal before you come. You'll be fine. Yes, he'll bring the mic to you.
What were some of the glitches? Did you have some glitches?
No, we've never had a glitch. In the rehearsal process, I'll let them talk about that. I don't remember it.
Well, I know one. So getting back to that day where we all played with matches for a day, it was a really fun day. And then we started to do the scene, and then we were doing the scene, and we were really into the acting. I was really doing the acting, and then all of a sudden, it's flaring pain happened in my fingers, and I realized that I couldn't hold the match like this. I had to hold it like this during the scene. But it was just one of those moments where you lose yourself in the scene, and all of a sudden you're like, I've just burned myself. Because that is a perfect match, but it's really hot. But so you have to know, it's a thing where you learn as a character, you have to hold a match in a certain way in the scene, because the scene lasts for a while. And whereas you wouldn't think about that if you just lit a match and held it. You had to, you have to have that match sustained for a while, so you have to hold it in a certain way and constantly check in how close that flame is to your fingers before you get there. So that's a glitch that happened.
Also, the first time we were in tech and it was dark on stage, it's really dark, very, very dark. And we realized very quickly, we were trying to do the scene, we almost walked off the stage because you can't see anything. So we had to, request glow tape, but not glow tape that you guys can see in the audience. It has to be like hidden. And I mean, there were definitely glitches. I mean, I have to go up to the top of the stairs at one point and do something, and I couldn't find the stairs. So, there were definitely some moments where we go, okay, yeah, we need to work on this, and let's find where we can put some glow tape. So.
There's also several moments with what we were doing. We spent a lot of time, which will sound funny to you perhaps, but we spent a lot of time figuring out how to knock things over when the lights are on, right? How we can walk into things so that we can see the blind lady not seeing that they're there and not anticipating, because you'd be surprised how much, if you can see something in front of you, how much you will notice that it's there and interact with it before you knock it over. So we spent a lot of time figuring out what is the best way to knock something over, and then how is the best way to make it not look like she knows she's about to knock it over, right? And that we interacted with the sofa, and Michael was working on it, and we found out that we can't just lay down on it really hard like we thought we could, because although it looked soft, it was two separate things and had a big wooden beam in the middle that he felt very strongly in his back, right? So there's all sorts of little things that we do as you think, oh, it's just this little simple. When you watch it on stage, it's a little tiny moment that you might not pay. Oh, that was really easy to do. Actually, not. All that stuff that we had to craft was a long process of how's the best way to make that go through. And when we knocked over the drawer for the first time, the knock was fine, but then we realized that the button on the end of the drawer was sticking out farther than the level of the thing, and it was causing undue stress. So there's all sorts of little stuff that you just wouldn't think about as the best way to knock something over.
We broke the phone. Yeah, that was one thing that happened. Yeah.
Now I'm going to say something about that phone, because you're going to come and see this play, and you're going to see that we use a push-button phone. And you're going to think to yourself, oh, well, that's not period. The push-button phone was invented in 1963. I'm just saying that. Didn't really gain wide use until 68. But it existed. And that's good enough for me, because I tell you, just think about, and it was really cute. We had a rotary phone. We started out with a rotary phone. You didn't break the rotary phone. You broke the first push button. So we had a rotary phone. We have a little girl in the play who plays Gloria. She's 12. She had no idea how to use that rotary phone. It didn't take pictures. You couldn't text. It was an alien device to her. But the playwright, his history was Dial M for Murder. Telephones figure prominently into Frederick Knott's storytelling, and telephones figure very prominently into this storytelling. Well, just think about it, all the phone calls that have to be made. You pick up the phone on a rotary phone, you go, 3, 6, right? It took forever for those scenes for them to dial. So thank goodness we could at least hang our hats on push-button phones, because a push button is and you're talking on the phone. So those kind of conventions, little stretches that enhance the storytelling are very important, even if they break a few of them. And Linda, our props master, is not really on speaking terms with me right now, because it's a terrible play for a props master, because we've broken everything. And she tells a story about when she did the play in Texas, they went through 3 refrigerators, because the refrigerators really get beat up, and they're antique refrigerators. And so that's, it's just a tough one for a props master, but I'll tell you who else it's tough for. And this is talking about rehearsal. Because it's an old-fashioned play, it has scenes. Plays today don't necessarily have scene they rarely have flat out, where the curtain is supposed to close and the set is supposed to change and the curtain opens back up. Well, we don't have a curtain at the Rep, so we do blackouts. And I really wanted, for this particular play, I wanted transitions from one scene to the next, and there are 3 of them. I wanted them to be in the pitch black. I didn't want you to see it happen. And so we have 2 production assistants who come out in the pitch black and change the set. And to do that, they had to memorize where everything was. They do a complete turnover, and they do it in 52 seconds. And how they do that without running into things and without falling and breaking themselves and the stuff is pretty astounding. So what you'll see when you see the play, particularly the first transition, is it's not hugely visible because furniture doesn't move, but everything on the furniture moves around. And they do all of that in complete darkness with no visual aids at all. They just have memorized where everything goes, and they bring it all in and place it all. It's pretty impressive. You don't see it, but it's impressive. Yes?
Glass gets broken during the show and various things, is that right? Glass?
No, well,
glass?
yes, it does.
And I'm wondering how you handle that from a safety standpoint, if there's glass shards, or is it fake glass, or how you handle the glass breaking scene.
You will think glass is being broken. I think you will think that. I think our audiences that have seen the previews believe that glass is breaking, but it's not. Yael has created a really cool effect, and the sound designer has created a really cool matching effect that give you a very precise impression that glass is being broken. We'll see what you think when you see it. Other questions? Yes, ma'am.
How long have you been rehearsing?
22 days. It'll be 22 days tomorrow. Every play at the Rep rehearses the exact same amount of time, whether it's Les Mis or Memphis or Red or Wait Until Dark. 22 days from start to finish. 7 hours a day, 6 days a week. Yes. He's coming back with the mic.
Do you have a backup if the match does not go off?
Yes, that's a very good question. I've got extra matches in my pocket. There are extra matches hidden around the stage that you guys will not be able to see, but we know exactly where they are. There are matches everywhere. Hopefully we won't have to stop the action and search for it, but if that happens, we know where they are.
There's also one of the PAs is standing in the wings with a fire extinguisher with a huge piece of glow tape on it that we can see, that doubles as safety measure and also a sort of a landing strip for us as well.
We talked about it a little bit while we were working. What do you do if the first match doesn't go off and they have to find the second match, right? Because there's usually the match is interrupting somebody from doing something else. So yeah, we talked several times about, okay, this time the match doesn't go off. What are you gonna do while they scramble to get their second match? So we're hopefully no one will ever have to see our contingency plans, but we've got things, because again, it's one of those things particularly if you talk to somebody who's done 700 plus performances of a thing, stuff goes wrong, right? Stuff doesn't always happen the same in live theater. It's one of the fun, exciting things about it is that sometimes things don't work like you anticipate and like you've planned, but the show will go on still, right? So you figure it out.
Other questions? Yes, ma'am.
I find it fascinating how you connect the acting on the stage with the music, and the orchestra is back in the back upstairs room. Could you talk about that a little bit?
For our musicals, like Memphis, when we use live musicians, we have a pit in the theater, an orchestra pit in the theater, right on the front of the stage. But it was back in 2008 when we were doing Les Mis for the first time. We started experimenting with moving the sound out of the room. Why is that? Because particularly when you have brass instruments, they're very hard to control the volume. Our theater is shallow and wide, and so the sound, depending on where you sit, you hear a different version of the show. Whether you sit up or down or in the middle or on the sides, it hits you differently. We've always wrestled with sound design in that space and trying to get sound design right given our resources. And so what we found through experimentation was that if we moved the musicians to another room and mixed their music through the same system where the actors are being mixed, because in a musical, all of the actors have microphones. Now in a play like this, nobody has microphones. That's solely reliant on their own skill as an actor to project. But in a musical, you've got to come out over top of the music, and you've got to do it 8 or 9 times a week, so you have to be amplified. But we found that we were able to bring the voices forward in musicals by putting the orchestra in another room and by mixing them through so that the technician who's mixing all of the 20 mics of the actors is also mixing all of the musical instruments at the same time, so that we can make sure that our goal is to make sure you understand every word that's being sung or spoken with underscoring. And that was particularly important in Les Mis, which was a sung-through musical. So that's why we experimented with it with Les Mis, and because it has brass in it. And then it was so successful for us that we've kept it that way. There are trade-offs. When we did Because of Winn-Dixie last year, the composer, Duncan Sheik, insisted on having the musicians in the room because his instruments were acoustic, and he didn't want them mic'd, and he felt like the sound reverberated more effectively in the room if the musicians were in the room. That created other problems for us in that project, but it was world premiere of his music. We wanted it to be heard the way he wanted it to be heard. So that's the background on why we do that, and we've found that at the end of the day, that is the better way for us to do musicals. Now, I'm going to wrap it up now because it's the end of our time. I want to again thank our good friends at the Clinton School for bringing us here today, and to thank all of our actors and designers for also joining us. We open tomorrow night. It runs for 3 weeks. I hope you'll come and see Wait Until Dark. Thank you all for being here today.